and 3 in this series where I am programming an NES game. Tonight live on Twitch. Let's get into things. Put out episode 4 of the Zero Pages. That was a long time coming, but seems like people have really liked the content there, which is great. I'm glad that it's a useful guide to getting a sprite to display on the screen. And the plan for the next Zero Pages episode is to work on backgrounds. It had been suggested we do backgrounds, and I hadn't really thought about it that much because backgrounds in and of themselves, the basic background functionality is actually pretty straightforward. It's only when you start getting, when you start getting into things like the attributes that it gets complicated and annoying. So that sounds like a good natural next step for Zero Pages episode 5. But let me know what you think in the comments below in the recording, or if you're listening here in the live stream, because I want these episodes to reflect what you're looking for and not just what I want to put out there. Although, if I don't get any good suggestions, that's what I'll keep doing, and we'll just keep covering topics on NES development, since they seem to be watched pretty regularly. So I'll try to keep the next few episodes shorter and kind of condensed down in terms of content. For that episode 4, the Hello Mario, I just couldn't, as far as I could tell, I couldn't figure out a good way to put that into any sort of smaller format. There's just a lot to cover when you get started. The initialization code is one thing, setting up your segments. We could have divided those into smaller pieces and made the video smaller, but I feel like it would have interrupted the flow of the purpose of what we were trying to do in general, which was initialize the game to the point where you could display a sprite or a collection of sprites that made up a single character on screen. We'll be building episode 5 based and other episodes where we kind of go into more advanced topics we'll be building on what we did for episode 4, so we won't have to go over all of the stuff that we did there again, which is good because that will help give us some momentum into covering the topic without rehashing a lot, and allow us to do it much more quickly. So that'll be good. I think people will definitely get some more use out of that for backgrounds, and debating if I should do an episode based on explaining the palette stuff. It's super technical, the palettes, the difference between the palettes because of NTSC signals and PAL signals, and then also the revisions of the NES and whatnot. It's simple to explain at a high level, but to go deep into the reason why it is the way it is not simple. So let's see where we left off last time. So last time we had gotten... Alright, so we had gotten all of this stuff working, but also changed the project format so that we could define our meta tiles and our sprites similarly, and then in the levels they would reference the meta tiles from the list rather than all new meta tiles. Just trying to think back on what it was we were doing in the last time, because it's been a while, and it's been a lot's been going on. So we'd switched over to using this meta tile list, and then we had mapped the meta tiles from the map import to the overall list, but then I don't think we had changed the way we were importing. Hey, Banshaku, how's it going? I don't recall that we changed the way we were exporting the meta tile sets at all. I think we just kind of left them as is, exporting based on what's in the map itself. Ultimately, we probably want to change that and make it so that we export the meta tiles just kind of straight up. And then so the reason I had rewritten some of this was because I want to be able to make this part work. That once we hit the end of a map, we transition over to these repeating meta tiles. But the other thing that's lacking right now is sort of an overarching structure of how to organize these pieces. Because right now we write the map header information, essentially. Right, the map information that we write is, let's see, where is that? So we just have this level 1 binary file that we create, and then we examine the first screen to determine the palettes that we need to be loaded. This doesn't work if we need, yeah. All right, so we iterate through and look for the palettes we need. Then we write 4 bytes of meta tile. Okay, so then we write the 4 palettes that we need loaded. Let's see, so we write the row count also. I think I need to do see, the problem is that well, spent a lot of time getting the map stuff working, which was important. But now we introduce this whole concept of moving the moving between these types of map pieces, which wasn't there before, and don't have any real structure to support that. I'm just trying to think what's the best way to do this now. If I had done the smart thing and spent some time thinking about this a little bit ahead of time, I might have thought about this idea before. But who knows? It's hard to say. Sometimes you don't think of it until you actually tear into it and discover you want to do something. And then you look back and you're like, oh crap. So right now I'm having an oh crap moment. So these are the map objects that we need to load up, like the enemies that are on the tiled map. And sorry, I'm not really coding anything right now. It's mostly because I'm just kind of taking in the structure of everything we've built here to just kind of think about what's the right next step. Because what I think we would need to have is essentially an array of data that defines, all right, here's what level 1 is. You know, here's the size of the definition of level 1. And that would consist of the fact that we have this map part and then the repeat part. Then we'd have to know how big this thing is, and then we might have another one for level 2, another one for level 3, another one for level 4, etc. And so what that would need in the assembly code is we would be defining the structure of this block of data that defines how the levels are laid out. Maybe with a table of contents at the top to identify where the position of each of these is. Forget about the size. So as I'm working through this and thinking about how all of this is kind of taking shape with the asset tool and stuff like that, there's part of me that is kind of poking fun at myself for the amount of time and effort I put into this tool. because, you know, you look at some of the homebrew games that are made today, and certainly probably back when the NES was a new product and games were still sold on store shelves at Toys R Us and Service Merchandise and your local retailer. A lot of these games probably didn't have complex tools that were trying to do the things that I'm trying to do here with mapping and automatic mapping and adjusting for meta tiles, and I'm looking at all of this and going, am I spending a lot of time building something that ultimately I'm not going to get a lot of reuse out of? Like in my mind, once I have these tools done, the savings of time will be when I want to build a level and rebuild the level and change the level. You know, how much time is this going to save me? I mean, it's certainly the functionality to export the content of the map and the content of the sprites and meta tiles is useful. Bonchiku, I had the same issue 10 years ago. Do you want to build the game or build the tools? This is the question. Well, I want both, right? I want tools to support building the game. The thing is, though, that part of me looks at what I'm undertaking in this project structure, and while there's certainly a lot of value in, you know, the sprite definitions, you wanted both and ended up with nothing. Well, yeah. And I'm sure that's pretty common. You know, there's a lot of value with these sprites and these meta tile, you know, formats and the exports, and being able to take the content out of tiled and export that into these files that we have here. When we do our export, you know, we have our level 1 object and or map 1 object and map 1 bin, which is our binary content for the maps. But I wonder if I'm putting too much work into trying to structure out all of this stuff beyond just, you know, exporting it and handling the palettes properly. You know what I mean? Like the intention is good, but beyond this game, like this level structure probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so the export process is useful once I get to this, once I'm, you know, while I'm working on this, but the map format for the next game might be totally different. It's normal to want to structure stuff. It's a common trait of developers, but we always overdo it. Yeah, there's if you've never read the Mythical Man Month, which you might have, Bonchiku, but for others watching who aren't professional developers, if you've never read that book, it's a good book. One of the fun takeaways that people always kind of quote, I think it's from that book, but if not, I'm gonna falsely attribute it to that book. But you know, the concept of when you're developing software, you know, there are things that are serialized processes versus processes that can happen in parallel. So they give the example that you can't put 9 women in a room, 9 pregnant women in a room for 1 month and get a baby. You each, it still takes 9 months, which is kind of humorous to think about in that particular example. But there's certainly real world equivalencies to that analogy that are used in software development, where development managers go, well, if it's going to take me 5 months to do it with one person, if I put 5 people on it, it'll take 1 month. And sometimes that's not true. And anyway, that book is particularly useful just in terms of thinking about software development as a practice. So where was I going with that? I don't know. Just thinking about project management and scope and whatnot. But I'm just beginning to wonder if I'm not saying making the tool is a bad thing. It can actually be useful. The main problem is that you may be putting more time in the tool than you really need to. Yeah, I mean, I am doing a lot of work in the tool to try and handle the way we're doing things here. But I'm thinking the process of exporting the assets is useful. The process of exporting the maps is useful. The process of checking the PNGs to make sure they can be converted properly is useful. The process where it is generating the assembly for drawing the sprites properly, that is pretty useful, just because it takes away the possibility of me making a mistake when doing it myself. But I think what I may want to do is have the export process simply handle generating the pieces I need, and then I can assemble them in code in the way that they need to be assembled. I'm not sure. And if you'll recall, for those of you who have either watched the older episodes or have been watching the live streams for a while, back when I started the asset tool, it was meant to be a full-fledged tool for the map and all sorts of live editing type things. But as I've progressed through this, I've pared down the scope quite a bit. So, going based on what I'm thinking here, the question becomes, what's the fastest way if I forget about this part here for a minute and just basically say, okay, barring anything else, we want to have the we want this process to export the map object data, the map data, our palettes, the meta tiles, the sprites, and then we can assemble the pieces, like the repeating meta tiles for the looping pieces of the game, separately, and I can define in the code itself. I don't know what I changed here that it thinks something changed. Something along the lines of how this will all kind of work together. I would suggest reduce the scope of the tool and enjoy. Well, yeah, I mean, I have reduced the scope of the tool. like I said earlier, the point originally was that it was going to be sort of an all-in-one tool, but then I switched over to building the maps in tiled and, you know, reducing the capabilities so that it wasn't so much a full editor like I had originally anticipated it would be. But I think we'll have to do that even further. So let's hey MDTA UK, instead of one tool to do it all, many tools. Some may be entirely command line based to do things, then a batch script while building. Yeah, I mean, some of this functionality in the one asset tool is scriptable in the command line. I had wanted that from the beginning. I didn't necessarily want to build a bunch of separate tools, but yeah, that concept is fine, certainly. There's nothing... Again, I mean, some of that came from wanting to do everything in the one sort of mega tool. But as I progressed in putting together the game logic and trying to build things, I realized that that wasn't really super practical, and so it needed to be command line based. And then, it sort of took shape where it could have been separate tools. So I guess what I want to do... Well, let's do let's do something else. Let's tonight, instead of focusing on that, because I'm still not 100% sure what I want to do there, let's focus on implementing the mode that just draws a particular meta tile for the whole screen, and then we'll loop a certain amount of times. What is it using scroll counter for? Story scroll counter. Actually don't know what that's being used for. Load A. Done with objects. Load A scroll counter. Compare to 8. Increment. Oh, okay. That's what that's for. So let's make it so that when we get to the end of our map here, that we switch over to a fill pattern mode, basically. So, sorry, I'm scrolling around trying to think of what's the right way I want to do the definition. So, let's say background mode, none, just so we have something, map, repeat scroll. Oh, I know what I was thinking of with Mythical Man Month before. I'm pretty sure that's the book that defines the second system syndrome. But regardless, the point I was going to make with that was that there is this inclination that after you've designed a system once, you want to redesign it and you want to do it way better than the first design because you think, well, the first time I did it, I didn't know what I was doing, and I know what I'm doing now, and I could totally do a much better job if I rebuilt the whole thing from scratch. It would be amazing now, and you put in all this complexity that you have implemented in the old system that maybe you did in a totally janky way because it was added after the fact, and you plan it, it's going to be the best system ever, but you've totally over-engineered the whole system. And so what ends up happening is that it turns out to be not as good as even the first system. Forget about being better. And yeah, and so it's a common thing, and it's true of, I think, almost all engineers have that problem. What did I call that? Background mode. MDTA UK is repeat scroll a totally separate mode to the map. Yes, so the map will end and then you will transition from an area of the game where it is a map that's got a specific layout to a mode where it is just simply repeating meta tiles for a certain number of loops through. It's the same with design and 3D modeling. You take ages figuring out what you want and you have tweaks and hacks, but when you redo it, it gives you a better result. Well, sometimes it gives you a better result. Sometimes and maybe it's different with 3D modeling and design. With software, you have this, let's take an example of trying to think of so we had, I think I've referenced this example before. So at work, at my previous company, we had this idea where we had built this product on top of a database structure that it was pretty well designed. It had some things that it was not doing well, primarily because the team had grown quite large quite quickly. And so some of the people who had made design decisions had not been there for the initial design concept and didn't understand why we had designed the database structure the way that we did. And so there were a number of places where we had repeated data across the different tables. And so it created problems where you'd reference information in one table and it'd be out of sync with information in another table, because what had been the core table that was supposed to keep the sort of system of record intact of what the information was out of sync with the reality. So just as kind of a partially real, somewhat made up example, we had a table that recorded a system that we were interested in monitoring, and we had the host name and the IP address and maybe a MAC address and stuff like that. But if it were a virtual machine, it had been provisioned by another module within the product, and that module would record the host name and IP address. And I recall certain times where the information was out of sync and caused problems purely because it was two different places storing the same information. And again, it was because the people who had worked on that portion of the product hadn't been around to understand that information should have been in the core tables that we had put together. And you can argue, well, that was poor management or something like that by the people who were managing the project at the time. But ultimately, it came down to, like I said, trying to build a lot of code really fast with a lot of people and a lot of new people who came in unexpectedly in a short period of time. We went from a team of like 6 people to a team of, I want to say, like 20 people over the course of a week. So we had to find something for them to do, and we had stuff that we knew we wanted them to do, and they had to start doing it right away. So that introduced some challenges. But, so after we had the product out and had kind of tackled some of these problems and fixed them and gone through all of this stuff, we said, okay, well, the next version of the product, the database structure is going to change. And there were some ideological changes that we wanted to introduce related to how the database was going to be structured based on some trends that were common during the time period that we were working on it, and some management systems that were, or they're not even management systems, but management methodologies that were out there. So, again, any of you are familiar with the concepts of SIM, Common Information Model, and the DMTF, which is a standards body that defines things like SIM. And or do they define SIM? I don't remember if they define SIM or not, but they define a number of different standards. Let's see, dmtf.org. Anyway, so we were trying to go based on some standards that have been put forth related to the different standards that were put out there, because interoperability was a big thing for our company and our customers, and we wanted to be able to claim interoperability based on those standards. And so we were redesigning our whole database to use that standard rather than to just map our current schema to that standard through a translation layer, because we thought it would provide us with better interoperability. And we built this whole core infrastructure for handling data in the system, based on the idea that we could redesign how all of our product worked, make it better, make it faster, provide a lot more structure and prevent the problems that we had encountered in the past, and just totally over-engineered it. Myself, being one of the key people involved in that problem. In retrospect, it's easy to see why it got out of hand and how it got out of hand. But there was, it was just the desire to do better. And the second time around, we wanted to design a more robust system where we wouldn't have the same kind of problems where the data was inconsistent and didn't lead to other sorts of strange issues with the product, and get ourselves out of the mode of directly interacting with the database, and instead use data access layers and data access objects and all of this stuff that is supposed to help you better insulate your application from changes on the data access layer and provide you with a better product. And it did not go, the reality was not quite as good as the theory of what we put forth. And so second system syndrome there, trying to define something that was way more complex than necessary. So that was a rather long story, sorry. Netscape 6 syndrome. Yes, well, we released a product. We didn't wait for we weren't like Netscape who just stopped releasing products until, I guess, when finally Firefox got released by Mozilla, right? That was supposed to that was sort of the next logical successor. And how long did that take to get released? I think I have that. I think I have that timeline right. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes it's better to just get something out there and correct it and surgically rewrite parts of it than it is to start over. Unless you like really know for sure that not only did you mess up, but you have the ability to um, properly measure that you are on track to be successful with this change that you're doing. It's you run the risk of doing more harm than good. And like I said, this was not. Oh, you know what? From the Zero Pages episode, I never put my CC65 configuration back. Where is it? And this is not to say that, I didn't have a part in this or anything. Obviously, I was one of the engineers and design architects on the project at the time, and the intentions by the whole team were good, and we eventually fixed the problems we had introduced by creating this whole new architecture. It was very stressful. It took a lot of time and effort, a lot of late nights, and we got it working. But it was not a pleasant situation. So you got to be real careful about that. There's always the temptation to rewrite from scratch, and you either end up not delivering or making a product that's worse if you're not really clear on your goals or your intentions. So. All right, so let's see, enough of that. We've got BG mode here, which will tell us our background mode and their background counter. Probably want to put this somewhere that it'll be easy to, well, you know what, the debugger in Messen is so good that it should be able to tell me where those live quite easily. And I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but Sour released a new emulator called Messen S, which is a Super NES emulator. Hey, E.C. Myers, how's it going, Eugene? Yeah, it sort of looks like a real shooter, right? Just for the benefit of anybody tuning in that hasn't seen it in a while, it is. It's I mean, it's still placeholder art, some of it, because I'm waiting for the artist to get back to me on some of these things, and I've got a new title screen that will, well, I can show that here. Maybe, do I have it? It looks pretty cool. It's not fully NES compliant, so it's not something that would be, possible with the current limitations, but it does look pretty awesome. And so Jordan is working on that. I gave him some tools, or a tool, I should say, to put together a screen that will look reasonable. But here, let me show you guys this, because I am pretty pumped about how good this looked, even as just a draft. Yeah, I saw that whole thing about BSNES being worked on, and the progress there, which is pretty cool with the new Mode 7 stuff that was introduced. Messen S looks really cool. I haven't tried it either, Bonchaku, because I I'm focusing on one platform at a time. I'd like to I'd like to get one thing built first. So that's a draft title screen that he put together. You know, subject to change obviously, and need some cleaning up to actually work on the NES for real. But I thought that looked pretty amazing. So he's doing some really nice work, and I'm excited to get some more of the artwork in here. Um, yeah, it's cool. Glad you guys like it. It's it's one of those things where I want to I want this to move faster, and so that's why I was thinking about what I said earlier about the asset tool and the amount of time I'm spending building that, and you know, versus the benefit of having it be completely, you know, pulling everything together. I don't know how important that is. It may not fit in one bank, but you can always bank switch midway. Yeah, that's part of what we have to figure out, is how we can fit all of that in. It may, with the dither, it may not be possible, and we might ditch that, even though it looks real good, or you know, modify it in some way. I tried. I tried the NES Screen Tool to import it. It did a terrible job. I also tried. Kasumi's got a pretty cool tool that he's built for importing images, and it's pretty impressive. But it also wasn't able to import it, at least as is. We may have to do some some fancy coding, or using sprites or something, or a combination of those things, but we'll see. So let's see. So camera Y is kind of continuously decremented to the point where we are let's see, we're decrementing load A, Y position, decremented, set that, subtract, branch carry, set, decrement, load X. Okay, so this is our camera subtraction stuff. Since the goal was sprite management, unless mistaken, consuming tool, nice tool. Yeah, he can't do, I don't think he can do the multi-bank yet either. But the challenge there, I mean, just overall, the challenge is that if you're trying to do something outside of the NES, and then import it in, that's where I start getting frustrated about the tools that are available, because even Kasumi's tool, as good as it is, I feel like what's actually needed is art tools, like Photoshop for NES, right? Like just a tool where you can draw, and it is custom built to handle the limitations of the NES, where the palette is only the NES palette. You draw in tiles. You can also add sprites, and it understands how the attributes work, so that you don't have to worry that when you go to put it on the NES, the attributes are going to screw you like they always screw everybody. MDA2K, you could stylize the gradient to use a more repeat. It's actually a pretty repetitive pattern. If I go back to this for a second, it was actually not that hard for it to find the pattern in it. In general, it was pretty. He did a good job of making it a nicely tileable pattern. My guess is he probably manually generated some of these, or somehow figured out a way for the art tool to do that. the problem is where you run into these angles, and having too many colors with like the highlight and the blue, the gray, and the black. It's tough when you're limited to the 4 colors per 16 by 16 area. So again, that's kind of where the art tool would be helpful, because you could build something or import something like this into it and then kind of work backwards from there by maybe using it as a template for drawing, almost like when people use tracing paper, right? They have the thing they're working on, they put the tracing paper down, and then they work on drawing over it. I feel like that would be a similarly useful thing. Well, see, and that's the thing. I don't even think I necessarily would want the tool to have automatic generation, right? Like maybe some tile deduplication functionality where it could just look at really simple stuff and just be like, okay, all these are black tiles, all of these are a repeating pattern, that kind of stuff, and help reduce the tile set there. But the rest of it, let the human figure out how to do it, because an artist working with the limitations available would probably be pretty capable of making it look great, even within those limitations of the system. I mean, I think that's why when you look at the old videos of the way the developers at Nintendo were working, they were working in tools that were extremely limited, purely, I think, because it then didn't lead to problems where when they wanted to put it into the game, they couldn't do it because of too many colors or whatever. Let's see. MDTA UK, are they all background tiles, or are there sprites to allow more colors? I think we're going to have to do some sprites. I think the sprites are going to just be necessary because of some of the highlights we want to put in there. Again, I don't really know, because we're still kind of working on that, just based on the on how complex it is, and based on the trouble that the screen tool and Kasumi's tool had turning it into something for the NES. I think it's just going to have to be a combination, but I don't know. Part of me wants to be like, okay, once I finish this game, I'm going to work on the art tool I was talking about, but I'm not an artist, so I feel like I would only cover about 20% of the problem, and purely from a programmer perspective, I feel like someone like Franken Graphics would be the right person to lead the project in terms of what she would want the tool to be able to do, and then you need someone who's a developer on the NES to understand where that's actually possible and where it's not possible. So, well, this is fun. We've glitched past the bottom of the screen. So what I want to do here is I want to actually check to see if we've gotten to the bottom of the screen. And just we could stop the scrolling or something, just to, well, we want to transition to the fill stuff. So let's do this. Let's Visual Studio, what are you doing? Or I should say VS Code. From experience with my project, a good artist will figure out what can be done with it. Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I hope so. I mean, Jordan certainly has awesome ideas. I think I showed once at the end of one of the streams. Yeah, I showed it to, I know, Bonchaku and MDTA UK, you guys were there. We had shown what the sprite was possibly going to look like. I'll show that again here just because I love showing off these ideas because I think like they look fantastic. And MDTA UK, you had brought up the you had mentioned the challenge possibly of flying over water, you know, being hard to see the ship, but I still think it looks great if I can find it. Oh yeah, there it is. So let me download that too. It's one thing I like about the live streams is that it's a little bit more interactive, and we can show. I'm not. It's bad for work. I'm not as focused, but it's good for showing off some stuff that I wouldn't necessarily go to in the pre-recorded episodes, just because it's not relevant to what I'm working on at the moment. Come on. There we go. So, I mean, I think that looks pretty rad. I really like the look of that sprite for the ship. Again, an outline might help, and on blue water, unless we used like a different color blue for the water, since there are a few different decent choices, might help. But yeah, I think that looks so cool. Yeah, so the current player ship is still this placeholder. I haven't put this one in yet, just because we're still messing with things. So it's this gray and red one. But yeah, this is why I'm not doing the art by myself, because I am not an artist. I guess with enough time, I probably could. I mean, the blue color is pretty distinct. I also don't know how realistically this maps to the real colors. And yeah, Banchaku, as you mentioned, on a CRT it might be tough. I do have to throw it up there because I know a bunch of people do still like to play on CRTs, and would be probably best if it worked reasonably well there. All right, so what I'm going to do is, let's see, we subtracted. So we subtracted one from the Y position of the camera, and then we checked to see if we needed to subtract from the Y position plus 1. I would then say, okay, if it's not equal, if we're saying not equal because of, well, crap. The problem with this is we have a couple of other places that skip the scroll process. Okay, so what we really want to do here is we want to do this after this and say, okay, branch if not equal. So if we didn't hit 0 in either of those subtractions, we just go to scroll process, because there's no point in checking if we've hit the 0 of the camera. Good thought about the CRT consideration. Make sure it still looks good with fake scan lines or crappy emulator filters. Yeah. I mean, I want to say it's going to work on as much as possible, but I think the main thing is that it works on an AVS and an original. If it works on both of those, it'll run on the analog. I have to look into, I don't have a Retron. I know there's some weird things you can do to make the Retron work properly, because the Retron doesn't actually look at the cartridge. It looks at, I think it does a checksum of some part of the ROM, and then based on that it determines what game it probably is and then what mappers it needs to use. And then as a result, if it's an unknown game, it can't run it. So you have to do things to trick it into thinking it's another game with the same mapper. That was what Bunny Boy was saying, something to that effect. I don't remember exactly. Bonchku, in that case, it will be important to review the art with someone that has experience. Oh, thanks, Eugene. That would be cool. I honestly, I mean, they're cool systems, but I have so many ways at this point of playing NES that I don't need another one. So that would be cool. I can even, at some point just send you the ROM to try out, right? Because it can play just ROM files, can it? But it's not like Hyperkin is supporting it, so I don't know. What do they have now? What is the latest Hyperkin system for NES? I know there was one that was. I thought the 5 was the one because it had like a whole bunch of other systems it could play. Is it some other one they've got there? Skip scroll process. Some of the other systems that are the system on chip that aren't dumping and emulating probably will work okay because they're actually. I think they're actually just trying to play the cartridge directly. All right, so I don't remember. It's probably dumb that I don't remember, but I don't remember. Or let me rephrase that. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but it's better to double check. I'm pretty sure by just loading up. Right, so 0 is 0, and then if I just want to double check because I don't want to be wrong about this. I'm pretty sure the yeah, loading a value that's 0. Yeah, okay, loading a value that's 0 from memory will hit the 0 flag. So let's see, what did I miss? I can play ROMs. Okay, they've been doing HD capable versions of the old NES. Okay. Retron HD. Ah, okay. Yeah, the AVS is a pretty great system. It's easy to use and it produces a really nice picture, and it's definitely way more affordable than the analog, especially now that you can't even buy the analog. You were posting, Eugene, the eBay listings for the analog where it was like $2,000 people were selling them for the analog mini, which is nuts. I mean, if you really want something that produces that good of a signal, buy a modded toaster model or something. I mean, geez, you can get. I know it doesn't have all the features that the analog does, but if you don't need them, if you don't need the ability to play the ROMs off the thing, or with the jailbreak, or do the copy NES, it just doesn't make sense. In fact, you probably could buy a modded. I might be wrong about this, but you could probably buy a pre-modded NES and an EverDrive for less than less than buying the well, damn, I'd be surprised if it was even close, for less than buying the analog NT Mini at this point. People are into it for the jailbreak support for 8-bit systems, but at this point, yeah, the Mister looks cool. The Mister looks really cool, and other than the fact that the analog systems just are so polished and really simple to use. If I didn't care about that as much, I probably would just have a Mister and use that for everything. I was watching Smoke Monster did a live stream of when the jailbreak was released for the Mega SG, and and he was saying that, you know, the analog systems are like the Lamborghini of retro gaming, where, you know, the quality is really great and it's set up and ready to use right away, and there's no problem. But it's expensive. Whereas the Mister is, you know, it's there, but it's like a hot rod, and you're always going to be working on it and tweaking it and messing with it, which I thought was a good analogy, because I mean, the Mega SG is amazing, and I think I mentioned I sadly put some money into buying a Sega CD too. Now, thankfully, the place that I go to, they do lots of repairs and mods, and so they were able to. They had recapped the Sega CD, but it was a lot of money I probably shouldn't have spent, so I sold off a bunch of stuff that I didn't use, just to kind of recoup some of that. All right, so if we load the Y position into 0, we're going to branch to skip scroll process, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the game into a loop here. If we basically, if we get to the point that we're at the end of the level, just to make sure that I'm doing this in the way the right way. So I'm just loading up the A register with the Y position and the Y position plus 1, and if either of them aren't 0, it means we haven't reached the bottom of the map, which means that we are not ready to do this. And if we have here, we're just going to put the game into a loop. One of the things that I was thinking about this is, I mean, I know I listed the ROM release of the game for the pre-order, but I'm almost wondering how many people actually care about it being a ROM. Oh, I didn't want to do this. I want to get past this part so that my ship doesn't get destroyed. Well, you know, it doesn't matter if my ship's there or not. So some people care about the ROM, some people don't. One of the things that I was hoping to do is release the game as just an executable that you can run. There's a really cool, what was it? A single header emulator project that someone had put together. I forgot who it was, but Kasumi had pointed it out in the Nintendo Age Discord. I'm sure he's posted it in the forums there too. And basically it emulates the game. It emulates the NES with a single header file in C, and then loads your ROM and plays it on a PC just by compiling it, which is pretty cool. It doesn't support sound right now, but sort of secondarily, I had started working on, because I don't have enough things to work on, trying to see what it would take to build a similar thing in C, essentially an emulator. I'm waiting for the level to get to the end. That's why I'm talking about this. So I'd actually gotten to the point where my CPU emulation was working. I'd written the CPU core for the 6502, and that seemed to be working pretty well. All right, cool. So this actually, I think this is right, because let's take a look at the map. I got as far as the CPU emulation working. I had started looking at the. Oh, this is right. I had started looking at the PPU and got a little skittish and stopped. Although Sumez said that the audio is actually the harder part of emulation. Where is video size? Where is... we go. So if I get rid of this, we should... Okay, so it's not quite the last... It's not quite the last... You know what, it didn't load the last row of the meta tiles, but that's okay. I think I don't care about that so much. So, but it did get to the end and stop, so that's cool. And for those of you who haven't seen, what did he call that? Let's just see if Google helps. He posted a link to, he wrote a browser-based NES emulator. There it is. And it's actually really good. It plays really well. Do I have any ROMs here? Yeah. Oh, it doesn't have... That one doesn't have the INES header. So yeah, I'm saying it plays really well, and now everything I'm trying to load up in it is not working. Here, let's try Quest Forge. So it's pretty cool. Another option for playing your NES games, which is really neat. Try something that everybody knows what it looks like here. Blaster Master. It's obviously not perfect. He's still making changes to it, but it's cool that the thing even works, and it works pretty well overall. Obviously, like I said, it still has problems, but like Mega Man 2 seems to be working pretty well. And it does support sound. I don't know how loud this is. I don't think I have the audio turned on right now. But, you know, not bad. Yeah, probably depends on the mapper. I agree. But, you know, again, this is all JavaScript based. So pretty impressive. And as people have been submitting fixes, I'm pretty sure that aspect ratio is correct. Let me see. As people have been submitting, you know, telling him about problems, he's been fixing them. 1024 by 960. So, what was that? 4x scale. So 960. Yeah, so it's 4x scale. But anyway, just kind of a neat thing to mess around with. And if you do mess around with it and see a problem, let him know, because he will look into it. It sounds like. And then CPP Chris on Nintendo Age also did some modifications to make it work. Oh, I see what you mean by 4x3. So instead of square pixels, yeah. I don't I don't know that he would do that. Or that he had any plans to do that. But I know what you're saying now. Yeah, the CRT pixels are shaped differently. That's why. Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't have any filters turned on. or any filters like that right now. But I don't know. I don't know how hard it would be to do that. But he, CPP Chris, then built some code where he actually made it so that you could use it on iOS, or on mobile phone, which, granted, is not exactly the best way for you to work on or play a game rather. But oh, cool! Thanks, NES Homebrew. So yeah, he's got the source up on GitHub. Okay, so wait, this is not his thing, because he goes by Sumez. I know it's on there. Sumez NES. He's got the source out there somewhere. GitHub, Sumez NES. Oop, I bumped the mic. Sorry. There it is. Good thought there, NES Homebrew. But this is the code. So it's open source too. So any modifications or bugs or anything you can put into there. And Chris has got his pull requests in there for mobile devices and touch. I guess he hasn't merged that change in yet. But anyway, cool thing to play with. All right, so we've got this working where if the camera hits the bottom, we lock the screen. So now what we need to do is switch over to loading essentially the same tile over and over again in the scrolling process. What time is it? 10:25. So let's see how we would do that. So at this point, then we would switch over to different background mode. And right now, we're updating the background. Okay, so we're updating the background using this new tiles buffer. And then at I think it's in the NMI. Yeah, so in the NMI, if we have new tiles to load, we do it at the NMI. Assuming that we actually have to, and it keeps track of where in the memory we need to do that. So actually that would be kind of cool. So let's go, instead of, wait a minute, let me think about this. Let me look at this for a second. Metatile flag or A2 branch, if not equal. Or when scrolling without writing to the name table or attribute table, just scroll existing contents. Yes, it would. Well, you know, that's a good point. We could do that, right? So basically what we would do then is we would let's load that, right? And then we still want to check our objects to see if we have to add a new object to the map, potentially. Oh, well, actually, there is no object for the map there. That'll be an interesting thing to account for how we will do that. So in the meantime, let's jump past that to just a skip row process, it looks like. And what we can do here is, this is the gameplay state, and if we're in this situation here, we're going to load the background mode, and we're going to compare it to background mode map, and branch if not equal to skip scroll process. So what we're saying here is, if we get to the point where, well, we do need to continue to modify the scroll stuff, just not the camera. Let me do this. Repeat scroll. I want to change the condition a little bit here. So if we're in the we're in the repeat scroll mode, then let's just jump past this. Otherwise, we're going to we need to continue to do this, and we'll change the branch if not equal to done scroll to just jump to this here. Let's see if I broke this. All right, so everything in the level so far looks good. NES homebrew. Yeah, I mean, it looked very close to what I was even convinced for a moment that was actually it. So it's an easy mistake to make. You probably would not want to be spawning during the loop section. I don't know. Like, I could see you wanting to do, because the loop section is going to be, well, there are a couple of reasons we'd be doing the loop section, right? So the first reason might be a boss battle, where you have a collection of sprites that make up the boss. That would be for a smaller boss versus a bigger one where it would all be essentially background scrolling. If you look at a lot of the games where the bosses are big, I wish it was out so you'd know what I was talking about. But Gradual Games Trophy Project, which hopefully will release sometime this year, depending on how Derek feels about getting that out there. That game is amazing, and the boss battles are epic because they're all the bosses are big, and all of that is done in the background, or the majority of it is done in the background and moving around. You know, you can scroll around to give the sense of movement, even though the all right, so the scroll speed is wrong, but yeah, now it's just doing a loop. So if I can go back down to normal scroll speed. So now it's just looping through the existing tiles. So yeah, that just kind of proves that what we're saying here is right. I mean, the good thing is the scroll Y is happening, but what also needs to happen, right, is besides doing that, we need to load up these meta tile rows into the background. You have your spawning objects placed on the map. If it loops, the same thing will spawn. Oh, right, yeah. So I'm not saying that we want to use the same logic for spawning things. Initially, I was like, oh, that can stay, but I thought of the same thing that you were just saying there, which is that all the object spawning is based on the enemy positioning on the map, which is great for when you're planning out your game, but less great for when you're not in a situation where you're actually working in the confines of a map and you're just scrolling. So yes, you are correct that is a limitation with what I was saying I don't actually see. Oh, there it is. Oh, because it's not scrolled over enough. So yeah. So these two things define the two enemies that we saw at the moment, and that all works well. And yes, bosses would obviously just scroll the one time. Spawn the one time. So this scroll speed is much faster than I wanted, but I don't necessarily care about that right now. We do switch the repeat scroll properly. Perhaps having the JSON a list of spawn points that iterate. Yeah, possibly. This is exactly what I was talking about before with this whole project file format, where I'm kind of like, do I want to put it in here? Do I want to put it in just the code and, you know, save myself the hassle of loading this and just make the asset tool literally just related to the assets and loading and exporting the assets, which is becoming more and more appealing. So, all right, so we switch over to the repeat scroll mode. We probably need to set what the background tile or background meta tile is. We can cheat. We can cheat here for the purposes of wrapping up for the evening. If we have our character view here, and I want to just switch to all water. This is tile 61. So for now, what I'll do is load a BG mode, compare it. All right, so that's going to set that, and then what I'm going to, I think what I'm going to do is, like, this is obviously super janky and not exactly the way we would want to do it for real, but just to kind of drive the point home and then wrap it up for the evening. Load X with 0. So store A into, what is that array called? New tiles, something like that. The other thing that we would need to do is force the attributes to all be correct as we load, and that won't be nearly as painful as it is today because with the map, because the challenge with the map right now is that we are changing the attributes as we go. With the tiles that we have that we're loading, the attributes are going to be all the same, so it's really not a super huge problem. So about the only other thing we need to do here is when we get to a point where the scroll is roughly appropriately positioned, we want to tell it to blast the new tiles into the screen. So the way we do that, and this is like super rough, and I'm just purely doing this for the sake of kind of proving this point. For the transition loop, you could increment the scroll speed and then return. Well, the transition from one speed to another does need to be made more gradual, but we're sort of flying by the seat of our pants right now here. Process scrolling, load metatile flag, or or 2. Why am I doing an OR? Shouldn't that be... Am I missing something? It's doing an OR operation, which would set the 2-bit to 1. And if it's not equal, because it's not 0, but it would never be 0, right? Shouldn't this be an exclusive OR? Has that been wrong this whole time? Or am I just missing something? Because I want to check to see if the bit is set, and then if it is, then do the update. Instead of updating every v-blank. Yeah, see, that didn't break it. I wonder if I was doing that operation every frame, which wouldn't hurt anything because the screen mem, I mean, it's inefficient, you don't want to do it, but it's just kind of funny. I didn't realize I was doing that. All right, so okay, so if scroll Y is load a scroll Y, and let's see if we actually, if it's just 0, I need it to be faster. Scroll Y. So if it's branch, if not equal to, right, this is why I don't like the anonymous labels, because while they're handy at times, they also get you into weird, stupid problems. So load A, scroll Y, branch not equal. So if it's equal, that means it's 0. And what do I want to do? I want to load A 2 and store it into meta tile flags to tell it to blast in some more tiles for me. Oh, is it still... Is it jumping? Here, you know what? Let's... I don't like this anonymous label here, so let's repeat scroll. Branch not equal to process map mode. It just makes it a little bit cleaner. More, faster. Oh, I didn't realize there was a shortcut for maximum emulation speed. Not that it's that much faster. I should just reduce the size of the map. I'm just afraid that if I do that, I don't know. I'm pretty sure the map export is working okay, but I'm just partially afraid that if I do that and there's a bug, I'm going to get stuck with a map that doesn't work. So, yeah. So basically we should get into a position here where we're still processing the scroll. Load A, scroll Y, compare, do that, all that junk. Scroll Y, branch not equal to this. Jump to skip process, load A. Yeah, exiting. So yeah, once I get the looping working, I gotta get exiting the looping working. Yeah, that part's relatively easy because it's gonna just be a fixed number of repeats through the loop for the most part, unless there's some specific condition that has to be met, like player dies or the boss dies. All right, so what's going on? Where is the code currently? Populate. Oh, I always do this, man. I always do this. I always do just a compare instead of a compare X and put myself into a dumb position like that. Yeah, so breaking out of that loop will be relatively easy by comparison to all of this. Then you have to get exiting the loop, working the map, continuing to the load. Well, so the thing is that I actually don't know that it's going to load from the last position of a map like this. More likely it will then string together a bunch of them, and then instead of having a bunch of long ones like this, where this is what, 100, how many metatiles high is this? What do I have? It's 100 metatiles high. You know, do something like half size, and then or smaller chunks, and then more repetitive. Unless I end up doing a lot more with bank switching, which is possible because, you know, space is pretty cheap. It's just more about what you can fit into each of the banks. Because the limitation then becomes how much can, the limitation is how much is actually accessible by the CPU at any given time versus how much can fit on the cartridge as a whole. Pretty sure there are pretty inexpensive 512K and 1 megabyte cartridges, maybe. And, you know, that's a lot of space for an NES game. Let's see, I think we're at the end here. Let's see if it just starts forcing. Okay, cool. So we're into this section that I wanted it to be in, and I want to have it hit that. I'm surprised it. Oh, yeah, I'm just doing dumb things. It's only doing that at the beginning. It'd be cool if I could just modify my. Shouldn't have to wait to go through all the code. The whole. I checked if scroll Y was 0, but that was dumb. That was not what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was I wanted to check if we had rolled over to 0. I wanted to do a modulo of 8, so use that same trick we've been using where we mod 7, and then if we hit a multiple of 8, it goes back to 0. Let's so, oh crap, just wanted to find hit a breakpoint here. So we'll see if we can get this going, and then wrap up for the evening. And then hopefully next week I'll be able to do regular programming recording on Monday. Just work has been busy, so Mondays for whatever reason have been tough for me the last couple of weeks. Next week, Tuesday night, I might do another one because my wife and daughter will not be home. So that might actually make it possible. We'll see. I might just do a stream just for fun and play some shmups and see if I can find any cool ideas to steal. I was watching Eugene play Dragon Force, and it's one of the few games that I've seen on the NES at least that really kind of does a similar thing that I was trying to do with the sense of height and speed, which is cool. And it has some really nice stuff that it was doing with enemies moving up through the water and popping up. Eugene, you weren't on some of the streams earlier where I was talking about, some of the concepts that are going to be core to the way the shmup works, to the way this game works, which is that I want it to be, one, semi-realistic in the terms of how you're attacked by enemies, so less sort of float down from the top stuff, and where there are situations where things come in, there should be some sort of like tell or sort of precursor warning to give you at least a hint where something is going to come in fast but not necessarily be completely obvious from the get-go. Why is this not store metatile flag? I am disappointed that this does not work the way that I wanted. Really? What did I do wrong here? Load a metatile flag. Do the exclusive war in bit 2. Oh, I guess I don't want to do an or. Branch if not equal. So the or was wrong because what? Because it branch if not equal never would have been not equal. I think I wanted to do an and. If that bit is set, then I don't know. I don't know, man. Sometimes my brain just doesn't want to work with me. In my mind, I think I know what I'm doing, and then it translates to code that just doesn't work. And you all get to see that. Usually I get the benefit of not having a live audience. Well, so now that broke it. That does the repeated store. I'm... Metatile flag, what did you actually do? Tell me. So we store 0 in it. We increment it by 1. We have to update the attributes. Okay. Then we OR it by 2. If we load a new row. Alright, so I was doing an OR on it like this, which was just setting bit 2 every time, so that meant it was basically loading crap every cycle, right? Where are you? Which, that doesn't make any sense. So, I don't know. Right, this is literally running every cycle. So, did I mean to do an AND on 1? Or maybe when any bit is set, which would be 3. I tried out Star Soldier on Switch NES Online recently. Kind of interesting. A little confusing with being able to fly under things that... Yeah, I saw that. That was kind of a cool... That was kind of a cool little thing they were doing with the flying under. I was surprised to see that. Does the scroll position value change to 0 as it reaches the top of the name table? Could they help in detecting when it was... yeah, that's what I'm doing. So when it's when it hits the 0, it is looping. What I'm trying to understand is what I'm setting that the metatile flag when I'm setting those values, because it indicates when a new row and a new attribute set needs to be loaded. And the answer shouldn't be every frame, but it appears to be. Oddly, or it's not updating the attributes properly. The tiles are okay, but the attributes are broken. God, I hate attributes. So if it goes to do the load of the row, or a compare 1. Yeah, see, it's like, I don't know why I was using an OR there, because that doesn't make any sense. It's always going to be non-zero if I do an OR, because I'm adding the bit. So it's almost like it's just so weird. Okay, that fixed that problem. So strange. I don't know why. Okay. So let's go to max speed here. The PV viewer may help. Yeah, I mean, again, it's the issue is more so me not remembering. The issue is me thinking the code worked one way, but instead finding it didn't, and then being confused as to why it didn't work the way I thought, which turned out to be a bug. Now, the good thing is, that we cut a bunch of cycles out, because instead of consistently every frame updating the same memory over and over and over again, which is a waste of time, we are now only doing it when we actually go through and update the memory related to each strip of tiles that we're uploading, updating, and then subsequently loading into the PPU, which is the way we want to do it, and the way I meant to do it in the first place, instead of every frame. So that was just dumb. There's no other good word for it. It was just an oversight, and it was kind of dumb. Probably one late night where it was 12:15 or something, and I'm wrapping up after 3 hours of debugging attribute problems. So we're getting to the end of the map here. Let's see if we actually get the behavior we want now, where it will load up those tiles correctly. Thinking about it, it may not, except for one row, because the other thing. Okay, yeah. So the other issue, I just realized. Okay, so the other issue is that the screen mem is where we tell it what memory on the name table to update. So let's and we're not doing that. We're just telling it to reblast the bits into memory. Screen mem. We'll just really sort of jankily again make this work. So load a screen mem, subtract, set carry, subtract with carry. What is it? 32 tiles, right? Yeah, 32. So just 20 hex. And then if the carry is clear, branch carry set to this bad boy. And let's do a decrement of screen mem +1, which is the upper byte of the address. Oh yeah, this is this should not be. And so branch of not equal to. If scroll Y isn't 0, then we don't need to do this. So jump that way. That would have yielded a weird result. So slow. The scrolling is so slow. There's 16 by 16 meta tiles, but each meta tile, because it's each 16 by 16 is really 2 8 by 8, so you got to populate 32 across. It's 32 tiles across the whole pitch of the not pitch, the whole span of the screen. We're not doing updates in that memory with 16 by 16 meta tiles yet. We're just forcing a single 8 by 8 tile into it. Hopefully this works. If not, we will still wrap up for the evening, as it is past 11 here on the East Coast, and I still need to finish up some things before I go to bed. Check my work email, make sure nothing in our data center has exploded, and prepare for tomorrow's fun and games. Although it should be quiet. A lot of people will be out for Easter. So hopefully it will mean a peaceful day where I can work on fixing issues rather than addressing problems of the moment. Interesting. So it's not updating screen mem. No, it's not, because I'm tired and I'm making dumb mistakes. If I don't actually subtract, if I don't actually store the... Right, we're going to try this one more time because I'm just making dumb freaking mistakes and I didn't store the result of the subtract, which means that of course it's not going to actually do anything. You moron. Alright. Let's restart that. Sorry, making you guys sit through the map scroll one more time. Yeah, I mean, my phone would be lighting up like a Christmas tree if things were truly that bad. But, things are looking okay. Actually, it's better than expected. That's always nice. Cool. I'll take it. We're in the process of trying to get a customer live on our system, and it's been a long process, but things are turning around. Long work day, Banchiku. Long, tired from this week. This week has been just dragging on. It's been a long, somewhat stressful week, but all good things. All right, let's see if finally I get this thing at least getting some tiles in there properly. We'll see that the attributes will be wrong, so the some of the wave pattern will be green, and I'm okay with that. No, it's still... Come on, man. What's screen mem? Let's see. A is... See, I hate to stop when something like this happens because it's just frustrating. So it's 21 versus 41. So why? Let's see. Interesting. Where's my other breakpoint? Something else zeroing out. Yep, there it is. Metatile flag is getting clobbered. Boo. Shouldn't even be doing that. should just be going to skip row process. All right, one more thing. Skip row process. That's what it should be jumping to. What we can even do here. All right, one more for the night. I feel like 90% of my success as a developer has been in my inability to give up when faced with a problem. And just sticking to it. And eventually I learn how to do things in a smart way. But until then, I just put in the time. All right, let's see. I'll set a breakpoint for when we actually set the meta tile flag to 2. This is the wrong place. Here we go. Excuse me. Although I guess you didn't hear me, Steens, but still. I didn't want to have that blasting through your speakers or headphones. Eugene, that Kage game you were playing yesterday was pretty cool. I didn't get to see how far you made it, but that special move or whatever power that you have where like all those enemies just start dying all of a sudden, that was amazing. That was that was just a really unexpected cool part of the game. For those of you who don't know, Eugene is not only an author of note, but also an avid streamer, and he streams a bunch of NES games frequently. All right, so it did update that one strip. Obviously, there's still something wrong with my logic here, but at this point, you know, we've kind of yeah, Kage on the NES. Obviously still something wrong with the way that I'm doing it, and it's probably just something stupid, but like I said, I'm kind of tired and thinking that I'm just gonna be better off going to sleep and sparing you guys the torture of listening to me try and figure out what I messed up this time. I'm just surprised that it's not doing the update the way I want it to. $86. So what's the value is 1. Oh, I know what the problem is. Okay, so it's partially working, but it's also related to the fact that if you look at the name table memory addresses, I wasn't taking that into account. I guess I should have, but I was just being I was so focused on what we were doing. after a bit, you know, you've got the name table address starting here at 2000, and then we're updating, you know, at the bottom and looping around and around and around. And I'm not adjusting the address appropriately. So what it's just subtracting right now, that address. So it's not actually ever hitting the appropriate place on the map to update. It's just subtracting, and it's going to go into weird locations in the PPU which are not appropriate. So what I have to do is, in the subtraction, I've got to make it take into account the fact that the name table loops and has to loop back the memory. That's all. You can see that occasionally the behavior is a little bit wonky, where suddenly you get this weird behavior where the scroll isn't so smooth, and I think that's probably because I'm updating the scroll register inadvertently. So here, I'm going to leave a note for myself for next time, because I'm not going to remember, and you won't be here to remind me, because this will just be a recording. So to do the subtraction here is wrong, because it doesn't take into account the fact that at address 2000 we need to loop over to the other name table in order for this to be correct again. Please fix this so the scroll functionality works. Functionality works properly. Okay, thanks. All right, so that's where we're at for the evening. What we'll do is in the next recording, I will get this working properly, and then start to address the speed of the transition, and actually put a loop counter in there. There is a variable that we defined for it, I believe, here. Yeah, so we have VG counter. We need to be able to actually define you know, a counter value and count how many loops through we do, and then properly flip out of the BG counter or the BG loop mode and go back into... What I'd like to do is get it into a mode where it is looping back and forth between the map and then the repeated section, so that you get the map displayed, then we get a set of repeated tiles, and then we go back to the map. And that will prove out that the functionality is working to transition between the two. Again, the scroll speed will have to be mitigated so that it's a smooth transition, and if we have to speed up, we can do that gradually over the course of 1 or 2 screens, depending on how gradual we want it to be. And then I will hopefully have thought about it enough to have an idea of how I want to pull all this stuff that we're putting together here and exporting out of the asset tool into a level structure, rather than making the asset tool do that. And so just have the asset tool focus on pulling in and exporting the data in a way that makes sense, like it has been, but also allow it to do that for multiple map files and whatnot, versus trying to have all the structure of the entire game built out in here and then pulling that in, because I think that that's just going to end up burning a lot of time on the asset tool rather than on the game structure. And I'd like to start putting together the levels for real. Hopefully get some art from Jordan beyond the stuff that I showed you guys with the title screen and the main player sprites, and actually start putting together some of the flow of the game between the different levels, and you know, introduce cutscenes and whatnot. If you haven't looked at the itch.io page, even if you don't plan on pre-ordering it for the code access or for the or for the whole cartridge pre-order lottery thingy, there is some backstory there, so you should definitely check that out if you're interested in the game, just to get a sense of the story behind it. And yeah, so as always, thank you for watching, and thanks for everybody who was live on stream here tonight. Spent a lot more time chatting with you guys than coding, I think, but that's okay. That was fun. It was sort of a nice change up from usual. Thanks, Eugene. Yeah, have a good night, and Banchaku and MDTA UK and everybody else watching. Thanks, and I'll see you guys next week. Have a great weekend. If you celebrate Easter, have a happy Easter, and take care. Have a good one.